I'm Sparker, and I'm here to talk about North America's ancient civilizations. Today, we'll be focusing on Chilaga. December 3rd, 1818. According to what we are taught, this was when the state of Illinois was founded. Illinois is a Midwestern state bordering Indiana in the east and Mississippi River in the west, nicknamed the Prairie State. It's marked by farmland, forests, rolling hills, and wetlands. Chicago, one of the largest cities in the U.S., is in the northeast on the shores of Lake Michigan. It's famous for its skyscrapers such as Willis Tower and the Neo-Gothic Tribune Tower. Illinois received statehood after applying in 1817 to expand the border of their territory north so they could secure a canal between their waterways and Lake Michigan. Because of its close proximity to the canal, the city of Chicago became a booming metropolis, and even the fire of 1871 could not stunt its growth. In the second half of the 19th century, the great need for workers in the mills, rail yards, and slaughterhouses made Chicago a popular destination for immigrants and freed blacks. During Prohibition, Chicago became synonymous with bootleg liquor and gangsters like Al Capone. According to the History Channel, the first Europeans to visit Illinois were the French explorers Louis Joliet and Jacques Marquette in 1673. But this article, written in 1987 by Keenan Heese, points out that the first Europeans to visit Illinois, in this case Chicago, were in fact Vikings. Check this out. Is Long Lost Chilaga the Camelot of Chicago? By Keenan Heese, Chicago Tribune, March 4th, 1987. A 150th birthday mystery for Chicago. Is Chicago the ancient, mythical Chilaga, a place that appeared on maps more than 200 years before the city was founded? Experts remain skeptical, but a map published in Venice in 1605, long before even the Great Lakes showed up in the accounts of North America, hints that it may be. A local researcher at Newberry Library has been investigating how the name appeared on the map. The map was a reissue of a book, Le Relationi Universali, written in 1591 by priest and geographer Giovanni Botero. At the time it was written, there were no English-speaking settlements on the North American continent. What was known about the continent came from sailors who had charted the coastal area. From explorers such as Jacques Cartier, who had traveled up the St. Lawrence River, and from Indian accounts of the, quote, unknown interior. In the heart of the continent, past the end of the St. Lawrence River, appears the name Chilaga. The word is closer to the current spelling of Chicago than are many of the variations of the Indian word that appeared on maps after the area had been explored and charted. Chilaga is a legendary, mythical place that kept cropping up on early maps, according to Helen H. Tanner, a research associate at the Newberry Library and an editor of the book Atlas of Great Lakes Indian History. It is tops on my list to investigate, she said. I would like to find any very early account in addition to the maps that mention it. You see it later farther south, perhaps closer to where Kentucky is today. Sometimes a mountain is shown next to it. I don't know if you can say it had a connection with the present-day Chicago. Chilaga may have been an Indian word for this area in the 1500s or earlier. One possibility, though remote, is that Botero obtained his information for the map from the Vikings. He writes in his book that the Vikings had been to North America hundreds of years before Columbus. They also had been to Italy, and accounts of their fur trade in North America are in the Vatican archives. Some believe that they had settlements in what is now the Midwest. More likely, the name Chilaga came from accounts of Cartier, the French explorer, who in 1535 traveled up the St. Lawrence as far as the present-day Montreal. The name for the Indian village in the Montreal site was Hochelaga, a name that appears on a 1556 map, according to George Ritzlin, a map expert. Botero's Chilaga would be a mere corruption of Hochelaga and moved farther west. Subsequent maps could have picked up the change and moved it around even more. Or there may be a bond with the current place, which is now in the midst of a celebration of its 150th anniversary of incorporation. The name Chicago can be traced directly to Robert Cavalier, Sieur de la Salle, a French explorer who used the name in a letter written at quote-unquote Chicago on June 4th, 1683. He was staying temporarily at that site that is now Chicago, where his men the year before had built a small stockade with a log house within its enclosures. 2 years earlier, the Indians had applied the name Chicago to a fort that La Salle built at Lake Peoria. Chicago, spelled many different ways, is part of many Midwest Indian languages. It can be translated to mean many things: strong, great, skunk, wild onion, garlic, smelly, fort, and river. Popular interpretations tend towards skunk and wild onion, though more scholarly ones lean towards strong or great. A prominent Indian was named Chicago, but it is thought he was named after the area. Was there a commonly cited prehistorical area known as Chilaga? Did the Indians as well as the explorers and mapmaker Botero know of it? Did the Indians then apply the name to La Salle's 2 forts? No one is certain, but it is at the top of Helen Tanner's list to investigate. It sometimes turns out, she said, that the statistically most far-out possibility turns out to be the right one. Wow, that is powerful. That is proof for us that history is in the process of being rewritten again by the powers that be to hide our true past. If this article from 1987 is correct, Cartier traveled far enough north to potentially encounter that region, or at the very least some people hailing from there. It looks like an established township, or a city even. And if, as the article's author mentions, the name Chilaga is simply a bastardization of the village called Ho-Chilaga, then why has Chilaga been charted in a multitude of maps, drawn by different cartographers from varying time periods? Alright, so let's take a look at these maps I found on the internet. Such a wonderful, wonderful thing. Okay, so I actually went ahead and pulled up 5 maps, all from a similar time period, but all showing Chilaga in the general same vicinity. Now, all of these maps have been drawn by famous, world-renowned cartographers in the 15 and 1600s. Let's start with this one here by Abraham Ortelius. He was a Brabanton cartographer and geographer, and he was the creator of the modern atlas. He actually did several maps, was world-renowned. People went to him and sought out his work as the best, the number one for a really long time, super well known. And so as you can see, we've got Chilaga right here. Here's Nova Francia, Canada's right here. If you guys take a look at maps and you see this septentrial, that actually means like of the north, right? So this is America of the North. We've got Hispania Nova down here. I've got a whole video I'm going to be making about that. And you see California is not an island in this particular map, but you've got Chilaga right here, right in this area. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the other maps here. But just take a look at all of these cities listed. Now, granted, this part here is pretty barren, and we'll take a look at that in other maps as well. But you can see that it's being settled, or it has been settled. This map is from 1570. All right, again, 1570, the Americas, Chilaga, same area as before. As a matter of fact, this looks almost exact when compared to this map here. Let's take a peek at these two together. They are almost copies of each other. I would not be surprised if this was also by Ortelius. We'll get to this map in a second. It keeps popping up here. So next we have a map from 1574, again by Ortelius. I reference him a lot, as you can see. It's hard not to, because he was the number one. He was number one. to quote SpongeBob. Alright, so we've got Chilaga right here. Again, same general vicinity, California not being an island. But you see where it is. It's here, Chilaga. And we've got New France. Now, there are different names for different things in different places. Florida is always Florida. Did you notice that? But anyway, Chilaga. Here it is. Next, we've got this one here from 1598. Alright, so 20 years have passed since the last map we just looked at. And this one was made by Cornelius van Witvliet. He, I believe, was a guy from the Netherlands. And, but maybe not. I'm not positive. There's not too much on him out there, but he did make a famous work called Descriptionis Ptolemais Augmentum. And I believe it has to do with, maps. He was a cartographer. So isn't this interesting? America Siva India Nova. Alright, but we've got Chilaga here, Hispania Nova again, California not being an island. But Chilaga was important enough for them to mention it in maps that, look, there aren't a whole bunch of cities here. It's not like this is just mapping territories. It was important enough to put it in a larger font than the other ones around it on every map. So Chilaga was a thing. It was a very well-known thing for this time period. Alright, and lastly, here we have a map by the great Maggini, Giovanni Antonio Maggini. Now, he is a fascinating guy, has a lot of interesting credentials, but the two that I really wanted to highlight here before we dive into this whole Chilaga thing again is that, he actually studied and finished his studies in Bologna. Now, Bologna is a super fascinating, interesting part of our history that not a lot of people know about, and I'm going to be doing another video on this one here very soon, so remind me if I haven't made it by the time you're watching this. But in 1588, Maggini was actually chosen over Galileo Galilei to occupy the chair of mathematics at the University of Bologna, and it had to do with his belief in the geocentric system, which I thought was really interesting, and I figured I would highlight that for you folks before we got to the Chilaga part, which, as you guessed it, is right here. Is that not amazing? Now notice the Great Lakes are not listed. They're not shown on, I think, any of these maps. Now, you have to wonder if these places were so well mapped that they could list Appalachian, near the Appalachian Mountains, Florida, Chilaga, all of these fascinating places, all of these cities, you would think they would not miss 3 magnificent giant lakes right here in this area. You gotta wonder, are those lakes really natural or are they man-made? But that's a story for another time. In the meantime, Chilaga. These are just a few examples of the history that has been erased from our books. Look at all the cities here. These cartographers make that symbol only when there's an actual city, something of note, a trade hub. Look it up and see other maps with that symbol. There is a lot we're not being told here, folks. Who were these people? I believe that, as our astute friend and colleague John Levi said, it is the common man that will find the answers today. It's up to us, folks. Let's get cracking.